Hello, I'm Petra, a member of the community of Franciscans of Our Lady of Compassion. I wanted to have a little think today and a little chat about a post I posted earlier in the week, which was about the awareness of God's presence. And I just thought it might be quite good to unpick that a bit and explore that, because I think it's something that a lot of people really struggle with. So I just thought it might be good to have a little think about that and how it impacts on our lives and what it really means. But first of all, I'll tell you a story. It's a story about me when I was growing up. I was brought up a Catholic, went to Catholic schools, all that sort of thing. But I guess when I was about 8 or 10, around that age, I stopped going to Mass. I wasn't made to go to Mass by my parents because they weren't going. So I stopped going because it didn't feel very relevant to me. I found the Mass boring, I must say. And although I still believed in God, I didn't see where he fitted in my life. It didn't feel relevant. So I stopped going to Mass. I had no contact with the church except through school. Now, I've always loved nature and wildlife and birds and anything like that. And one day I was sitting in the garden at home, and we had this kind of like a mound, I suppose you'd call it, at the top of the garden. It's just in a town in the northeast of England. And our garden wasn't that big, but it was kind of longish. So right at the far end, as far away from the house as I could get, was this mound of earth that had grown covered in grass, and I used to really enjoy sitting on it. So I was sitting on the mound and I was just watching the birds flying in the air, and it was summer and there were lots of swifts flying around, and I was just enjoying being there. And then suddenly, from one moment to the next, from one heartbeat to the next, I was just aware of God's presence. It was such a profound moment. It was like a real metanoia, if you like, my real moment of conversion. Because God was suddenly so present to me in that moment that there was no denying he was ever there. He was so present, and he was so present in everything. And I was aware of God in the birds flying over. I was aware of God's spirit in the trees, in the grass, in the leaves. He was just in everything. And it was a real moment for me of realizing the connectedness of everything, that God is in everything. We are all connected. There's nothing that is outside of God and his love and his sustaining presence. And I think for me, Franciscanism was born in that moment, if not before. I've always been attracted to St. Francis as the saint who loves nature and loves animals. But for me, there was something profound in that moment about God's very presence in everything, and therefore our relationship, the fact that we are all related. We are all related. And I guess that sense of God's presence continued for a while. I don't remember when it changed, but since then, that's quite a few years ago, obviously, I've been in my life through various periods, sometimes of real darkness, when God just seems completely absent. I have no sense of his presence at all. And then other times, like at the moment, when I'm very aware of God's presence again in everybody and in everything. And I guess for most of us, life flows like that. We have moments of awareness of God's presence and times in our life when God seems very absent. And I know that for some people those times can go on for years and years and years. And if we look at the saints, for instance, Saint Mother Teresa, I think she lived many years in the darkness of not being aware of God's presence. And also Saint Therese of Lisieux famously also went through years of darkness. She describes at some point, she describes herself, I think it's in one of her letters or autobiographies, about how she describes herself as a little ball for the child Jesus to play with. And she says something like, how can I complain if he leaves me in the corner and doesn't play with me for a while? or even for a long time. And she struggled for years with this sense of the absence of God's presence, but yet she trusted so profoundly in God's love and God's presence, even though she couldn't feel it. And I think I just wanted to say something about that, because I think sometimes we can feel that if we can't feel God's presence, perhaps we've done something wrong, or we're not doing something right, or there's a problem. And I would say there isn't a problem. It's where you are. God might leave you in that state for years, or he might bring you into his knowledge of his presence tomorrow. There's no way of knowing. There's no way of knowing. I suspect that we all have to go through periods of darkness, of this lack of awareness of God's presence. I think it's part of our spiritual growth, part of our growth in prayer. But I just want people to realise that it's not a bad thing if you're not aware of God's presence. It's not a bad thing. It doesn't mean he loves you any less. It doesn't mean you're any less dear to him and precious to him. But hopefully at some point he will bring you into a fuller awareness of his love and his presence with you, because we're all so precious in his eyes, every one of us. Yes, even you. Very precious in God's eyes, and he loves us so deeply. And I think he just wants us to know and appreciate that love and receive that love deep in our hearts. So I guess that's all I wanted to say, really, is just not to worry. Wherever you are is where God needs you to be at the moment, to grow in whatever way he needs you to grow, and to do whatever he needs you to do. And if you are in that darkness, then don't despair, but just cling to God and trust in him, because he is with you and he does hold you very dear to his heart. Blessings.